Hello everyone. So in this video I will explain how a function rule works. So here you can see a table and you have three columns. First you have input, then you have a rule, and then you have an output. And the input is 1 and the rule says multiply by 20 then subtract 5. So the input is 1 and I have to multiply by 20, so I'm gonna just first write 1 times 20 and then I'm going to subtract 5. And if you remember order of operations, first you have to multiply, or if you think about PEMDAS, okay, so we have to multiply first before we do the subtraction. So you'll have 20 minus 5, so this is going to be 15. So your output is 15. So that's how the function rule works. You have an input, you have a rule which will tell you what to do with the input, and then whatever you are going to receive after doing the operations, you will have the output. Now then we have the input 2. Again, we have to apply the same rule, multiply by 20, 2 times 20, subtract 5. So 40 minus 5 should be 35. Okay, then we have 5. So I'll write this in details, and then minus 5. If you do the operation, you can use a calculator, that's fine. Get 95. Okay, so now the last two are different. Last two, we have the outputs. So we have 75 and we have to figure out the input, and we have the rule. Okay, so let's see how can we do that. So going from output to input. Okay, so for now I will save this, and then let's start with the blank. Okay, so we have 75. I'm gonna write output. We have to figure out what should be the input, and we know the rule. So the rule says the input should be multiplied by 20 and then subtract 5. Okay, but we don't know the input, we have to start from the output. But that means we are working backwards. I'm going to write this word backward, or actually we should say working backwards. Okay, so when we're working on inputs to outputs, what is the first thing we did? The first thing we did is the input is being multiplied by 20. So I'm going to write this here. I is for the input. I multiplied it by 20. What's the second thing I did? So I times 20, that was the first thing. And the last thing I did is subtraction. I subtracted by 5. That's the last thing. So I'm going to write first and last. So remember, to work backwards, we have to do the opposite of what we did as our last thing. So we subtracted 5. Now we have to do the opposite. So I'm going to write step 1, opposite of the last thing. So we subtracted 5. So we have to add 5. So the output is 75. So I have to add 5, which will give me 80. So that's step number 1. Okay, now I'm going to write step number 2, let's say here, because I don't have a space there. Now let's look at what's the first thing I did. First thing is multiplying by 20. So what's the opposite of multiplying? Dividing, right? So whatever we have, the 80, I have to divide it by 20 because the first operation is multiplying by 20. So I'm going to divide it by 20, and if we divide, we'll get a 4. So that means my input is 4. Now we can double check and find out whether we are right or wrong. So if the input is 4, I have to multiply it by 20. So 4 times 20 is going to be 80, minus 5, you'll get 75. So that's how you can work backwards to figure out the input. So in this case, the input is 4. I'll just explain this one more time. So when you're working backwards, first write what is the first thing you did when you're working from input to output. So the first thing is multiply the input by 20. This is coming from your function rule. And the last thing, we are subtracting 5. Now, since you're working from output to input, you have to do exactly the opposite thing. So instead of subtracting 5, the first thing is you have to add 5. So we added 5 with 75 and you got 80. After that, the first step is multiplying the input by 20. So I have to do the opposite. So we are dividing the 80 by 20, and that's how we got 4, and that's how we know that the input is 4. Okay, so this is one of the ways to find the answer. So now I'll show you another way. So please make notes about the steps, what you have to do. So please write the first and last step if you are working from input to output, and then write the steps if you're working backwards. Okay, right, so we're done here and we know the input is 4. So I'll save this and go back to this. Okay, so we figured out this is 4. Okay, by working backwards, I want you to do the same for the output 135 and see if you can figure out what will be the input. Okay, now I'm going to show you another way. This is method number 2 to figure out what's the input. So let's look at that. So let's open a new okay, so again I'm going to write the same thing, input, the rule, and the output. Okay, so either you can work backwards or you can try this strategy. Both strategies are useful. Sometimes you'll find the first strategy is more helpful, or sometimes you will find the second strategy is more helpful than the first one. So the output was 75. I don't know what's the input. I have the rule. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to write the rule first, and I'm going to write a blank for the input since I don't know what's the input. Times by 20, subtract 5, my output should be 75. Now think about this. This is a blank. I don't know what is this. So we have to multiply something with 20. If you subtract 5 from it, you'll get 75. Okay, so how do you figure that out? So first of all, to do this, I'm going to use a different color. So first thing is you have to figure out, okay, the whole thing. What should be this whole thing? And if you subtract 5, you will get 75. What is that number? That number must be 80, right? 80 minus 5 is 75. So I'm going to first write 80 equal to 75, right? But remember, this is not 80. This is a blank times 20. That gives you 80. So what number times 20 is 80? Okay, you have to think about that. So one more time. First of all, you're subtracting 5 and you're getting 75. That means this whole yellow box must be 80. Now let's look at inside the yellow box. Inside the yellow box we have a blank times 20. So the blank, what should be the blank if you multiply by 20 and you get 80? So that number must be 4, because 4 times 20 is 80. Okay, that's another way to figure out the input. So that's how we know this is 4. So this is strategy number 2, and I show you how to work backwards. All right, so that's it for working with input to find the output, or from the output to input.